I won about $30,000 on that game show. My dad took it because I was still in college. He was like, I'll take that, thank you. He gave it back to me when I graduated, and he said, you have a choice ahead of you. You could do something stupid, like buy a car, or you could do something that's going to change your life. And so I decided to move to London for a year on that money, which broke down to, after paying rent, that I had about 17 pounds a day to spend for the whole year that I was there. And I ended up at some theater company, and they were like, why on earth would we want to hire you? You're an American. And I was like, well, because I'll work for free, and I'm smart, and I'll be helpful. Theater people to me are like magic unicorns. They're very skilled. They're usually very passionate. They're very multi-talented. There's like this whole bum thing about comedy. You know, it's math. And so if you go ba-da-da-da-da-da, and the other person goes, "Meh," they're not going to laugh. But if you go ba-da-da-da-da-da, and the other person goes, "Ah," they're going to laugh. I opened the cabinet, and so that check was pasted in there to Gulfshore Playhouse, $10 million, Patty and Jay Baker. And I ripped it down. And I said, this doesn't work. And somebody can come 2 hours before the show and get a rush ticket for half price, so they can really watch a Broadway level quality show for $17.50. So the actors are the ones on the stage really bringing the characters to life. A director is a very mysterious career path for people. The reason why I think that is because directors are invisible.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Spotlight on Good People, where we shine a light on humans that are making the world a more compassionate and connected and kind place. So today's guest is the force behind one of Southwest Florida's most exciting artistic institutions. She's a visionary, a builder, a creative powerhouse, and one of the most inspiring leaders in the arts. Kristen Coury is the founder, CEO, and producing artistic director of Gulfshore Playhouse. We're here on site at their brand new, state-of-the-art Baker Theater and Education Center, a dream more than a decade in the making. It's such an honor to be here.
It's an honor to be here with you.
Yeah, I think our community is so blessed to have someone like you in it, and this is a real honor for us to get a chance to get inside your head and to hear what makes you tick and
so
how you made all this happen, which is really special for our community. You did wonderful things and are doing wonderful things for this Pleasantville that we live in, which I call Naples. Anyway.
That's very kind of you. Thank you.
Go back to the beginning of it all. Where are you? How did you end up here? Where are you from?
I grew up in upstate New York. The age-old question is, what made you a theater person? You would think my dad was an impresario and my mother was a diva or something. None of that could be further from the truth. I grew up in regular middle-class America, all along Route 90 in upstate New York, between Buffalo and Albany, and everywhere in between. And the only two things that I can chalk up why I have such a deep passion for theater and why I love it so much is because I started watching Sesame Street at the age of 3 or younger, I don't even know. But I was absolutely addicted to Sesame Street. And even, what I remember of Sesame Street, they teach you the letters and they teach you the numbers and all that, but they were using, at least back then when I was little, was what I now realize as Broadway type songs. It's like la-dee-da-dee-da, la-dee-da-dee-da. What's the name of that song? And that's like a Broadway tune right there, and I think I just must have started loving it. My dad was addicted to MGM musicals, so he would watch every MGM musical he could, he came across whenever he would click and find one, and sang in the car all the time. But other than that, but other than that, I don't know. I mean, we went to plays, we went to shows, we went to concerts. As I was a kid, it wasn't like forced upon me. It wasn't like, we must go to this museum, we're going to go on a trip and see a show, but it was there. It was accessible to me, and I always remember loving it, seeing Annie when I was, 10 years old or 12 years old as a kid at my local performing arts center. It was so exciting. And so as in high school, I just started to get into it more from the behind the. I was always more behind the scenes. I was a terrible actress even when I was 16. So I was selling tickets and making posters and trying to sell the shows, and doing all that, helping stage manage and doing whatever I could do in high school, and ultimately majored in it in college. And the rest is history, I guess. So. Were
you on stage in anything in high school? Did you get it?
I did it. Of course, I was always like third ensemble creature from the left, and then in college, I wanted to major in theater, but I majored in acting and directing because you have to, there was no, at least where I went to school, there was no just strict directing majors. So it was majoring in theater with a concentration in acting and directing, which I find great because actually now as a director, and I do direct a lot still, there are a lot of things I learned as an actor, even in an educational setting, that help me now to communicate to actors and help bring the message along of the vision that I'm trying to achieve in the show to the actors in a way that they can metabolize and understand.
Well, what's the distinction between directing and acting?
So the actors are the ones on the stage really bringing the characters to life. A director is a very mysterious career path for people. The reason why I think that is because directors are invisible. When you go see a show, you talk about the great actors. You talk about the story. You talk about the songs that you heard. You talk about the tap dance number. But you never say, and that was a great direction, because if the director is doing their job well, everything ultimately is under the auspices of the director. Everything. That style of dance that you just saw, the way the song is sung, the tempo of the song, the costume that the actor was wearing, how they were on stage, if they were broad and big, or if they were, sort of more introverted and whatever about it, if they were angry, if they were sad, all comes through the director's lens and all the conversation that the director and the actors have all throughout the rehearsal process. So at the end, it feels like the actor's show or the music show or the dancing show. But it's all really the director behind the scenes pulling strings, and sort of imparting. If the director's good, they're creating a vision for a show that feels cohesive and it feels like it's one piece and it feels like it just compels you from beginning to end and you love it and maybe you don't even know why,
Well, how do you adapt to, so if you're giving direction to an actor who's higher profile and they're not on point with the character, and you've got to give them guidance with that. How does that go? Because especially if they're somebody who's thinks they're somebody or are somebody, what do you do? How do you handle that?
It can be very frustrating. Sometimes you have real breakthroughs and you get very excited. I can remember, it's funny, we're going to be reprising our very first show. We've never produced the same show twice at Gulfshore Playhouse, even in the last 21 years. But this year we will be producing again, and I'll be directing The Importance of Being Earnest, which I directed back in 2013 in the Norris Center. And back then, and I don't want to call anybody out, but we had a gentleman playing an old lady, and he was an English actor. And the Brits have a different sensibility about comedy than the Americans do. The Brits, for them, everything is understated and it's very, and they don't, they barely even emote. They just do a shift of the eyes or something. And for Americans, everything's more like, wah! And so the whole point is the old battle axe aunt is supposed to be upset about something, and her response is, a handbag. And while Maggie Smith in Downton Abbey, I'm sure would have pulled it off with nothing more than like an eyebrow. Handbag, and I would have laughed my head off on stage. And in America, what I wanted it to be as a director is I wanted it to be like handbag. I wanted her to just flip out, and he just wouldn't do it. He just would not do it. And for weeks I tried, and you're not supposed to really model, like what I just did to show you what I meant. Like you're not really supposed to do that from director to actor.
Really?
They consider that like giving a line note, and that's taboo. You should not do that. So you kind of have to like talk your way around every which way without actually exemplifying for them how you want it to be, which can be really
is that just a code?
It's a code. It's a code. It's just like don't offend the actor. They know their job. They know what they're doing. So don't spell it out for them. They'll figure it out. Give them what you're trying to ask them to do. Give them the action. Are they trying to be are they trying to be funny? Are they trying to convince someone to do something? Are they trying to persuade? And then hopefully through that, they'll come to the same picture you have in your head about how they say it or how they do it,
You got to get them there on their and they got to see it in their own way. Is the way
it's
you
really interesting.
Work around it. I was thinking I was in drama in high school, and we did the play Our Town, and I was George in the play. I had no idea as much as we went through it, I didn't get the meaning of it until later in life.
Yes.
Like how significant it was. And I remember Mr. Bechtel, rest in peace, my drama teacher, who was, I love that man because he just let us be who we were as teenagers, as we were. He was just somebody in the first time in my life treated us like we were adults, even though we were kids who were, teenagers who were still figuring stuff out. And that scene in the play where I was grieving over her death, my wife's death, and just how and I didn't get how big a deal it was until we actually did it and performed it in front of people. To see the emotion come out of people
was
unbelievable to me, to see people crying, like upset, so sad about this moment. And, I didn't really get it until later. Now I look back on that play and I think, oh my gosh, it's so significant in how life goes, the whole series of it.
There's so much to unpack with what you just said, which is like you get to the very heart of it. First of all, with regard to the idea of arts education and how you're still talking. You just said Mr. Bechtel, right? You're not going to forget him.
Never.
The impact he had on your life.
Yeah.
And nor will you forget the impact that you had on others when you did that role.
Yeah.
And you talk about interviewing people that making the community more sympathetic or compassionate, whatever was the word you said. Theater at its core is all about empathy. And one of the ways that I think it is so very striking in its pursuit of empathy is that it just plunges a whole group of people who are virtual strangers with each other into a dark room and asks them to imagine their lives as someone else. That's essentially what we're doing, right? Because we're in the dark and we're watching you play the husband and we're imagining what that would be like to be you, and the wife dies and the blah, blah, blah. And, excuse me, sorry. And then we feel it too. And now we've walked another footstep in your shoes and we understand you better, which helps us understand ourselves better and what it means to be human. And we share the human experience together in that way.
Yeah. No, I totally get that now. I get the impact and what it means for people. All right. Hey, everybody. Stop the action. Stop the podcast. I've got some news for you. Since you've made it this far, you're going to get rewarded. We're giving away $100 gift certificates to Robert of Philadelphia Salons, but it's only for the first 50 people who jump on this right now. So here's what to do. Follow us on Instagram. That's spotlight_GP, or TikTok, spotlight_GP. Then comment on the latest post with the words spotlight on good people. Real simple. Follow us and leave a comment. You're going to get $100. The first 50 that do that are going to get $100 to the salon. But heads up, this offer ends when June does. So you got to get it in by June. If we hit 50 before that, the game's over. So pause, follow, comment, and then get back to the good stuff. We've got more coming your way. It just hit me, though, when you said that the ripple impact of theater, of this work and what it creates in people. I know I'm always so moved when I see something. We don't go to a lot of live events, but when I do, no matter what it is, there's always something that I'm hit with that I don't know what it is, but I feel it in a way. Like, it's not like going to the movies at all. It's not like it at all, but seeing a person live performing in a moving, in whatever way, but it always manages to move me, just the courage that they have and the way that they convey their message. It just alters me.
If you think about the world the way it is now compared to how it was 2,000 years ago, and we sat around campfires and we talked to each other and we told stories and we went to church together and we went to school together and we worked in the farm or the field together and the world was about human connection back then. Yeah. And it's like anything but about human connection now.
Right.
It's everybody's isolated and they're behind technology and they're getting EMFs and they're, blue light and all the things we talk about, and they're on medication and they're not getting fresh air and all these things are happening. Theater is an ancient tradition of 2,000 years. And so I really do believe that there are still roots that go back to the amphitheaters of Greece where people gather together. And there are so many studies that show, for example, unlike a movie, when you sit inside of a theater, your heartbeats start to synchronize with the people around you. They're doing studies on this. When you hear a voice unamplified, it actually hits, like the way my voice is hitting you is different than it's hitting the people listening.
Yes.
Because it's coming through a wire and it's getting to their ears in a different way. But my voice is actually vibrating on your body. And so there's something actually magical in my mind about what happens when we witness something unfold on stage versus observe it happen on a screen, which is just a different thing.
Wow. Never even thought of that, but now I understand the feeling that I get from it.
Yeah, yes. And really where you're like, why am I verklempt? Why am I having an emotional response? And you don't realize, like, when you're looking at a movie, you're looking at it flat. If you're sitting in this seat or that seat, it doesn't matter. You're still looking at that same flat image. The hand looks like the hand. Yeah. But when you're on stage, when you're looking at people on stage, you might be over there, and therefore you're seeing this side of my hand, and you might be over there, and you're seeing this side, and I might turn around, you see the back of me. It's a 3D experience. Yes. It's a fully fleshed experience. And I think that's really special.
Yes.
I do.
Yeah.
That's why I'm so passionate about it.
Yeah, I get it. It excites me about it. Like I'm ready to take my wife down here.
Do.
Yeah.
Love to have you.
So what was it? What were you like in New York growing up? What crowd were you in? What was your...
Well, that's what you mentioned this too when you were talking about being in theater and the fact that it gave you, I don't know exactly how you phrased it gave you something to do or it gave you a place to be. And I think that that's what all theater kids are always seeking, is that they feel themselves the misfits. And I don't know why it is. Theater people to me are like magic unicorns. They're very skilled. They're usually very passionate. They're very multi-talented. And I don't know if that's because when you're 14, that's a very uncool thing to be. You know, you're supposed to be, schlepping around and like hating life. And theater kids have this kind of aliveness about them. And so they're all kind of like, what do I do with myself? And I want to get into sports and I don't know what to do. There's this theater outlet. And there are all kinds of studies about the kids that get into theater in high school or middle school don't get into drugs, they don't get into bad, street gangs and whatever. They have this creative outlet. And it's not even just about creative outlet, it's like self-expression, like learning to be confident in who you are.
Yes.
Also learning that maybe you're not such a misfit and actually starting to grow as a human, and then academically they excel and they don't get into bad stuff. And so I think that was me. I was a theater kid for sure in high school, totally a misfit of my own making. And smart. I mean, I graduated, top of my class, but it wasn't, but I had this need to express, And then so I graduated from college. While I was in college, I had been on a game show, the $100,000 Pyramid. And I won.
I wonder if I could find it on YouTube.
You might be able to.
Because I remember that. That was Dick Clark do that?
Dick Clark.
Yeah.
Dick Clark was passed by then. It was, excuse me, it was John Davidson. Remember that show?
Yes, of course. Yeah. Yeah, I remember the dollar signs turning around as the thing spun. Yeah.
I won about $30,000 on that game show.
You won? Wow, that was big bucks.
It was huge. I mean, and I was like, 21 years old or whatever. So I was very excited. I qualified. I won the big one twice for $10,000 each, and then I qualified to go to the $100,000, and I didn't get it, unfortunately. But I exited the building with about 26 net or something like that. My dad took it because I was still in college. He was like, "I'll take that, thank you." He gave it back to me when I graduated, and he said, "So now you have a choice ahead of you. You could either do something stupid like buy a car with this money, or you could do something that's going to change your life." And so I decided to move to London for a year on that money, which broke down to, after paying rent, that I had about 17 pounds a day to spend for the whole year that I was there, which was absolutely nothing. I got no haircuts, I didn't never ate out, it was very expensive in London, still is, but best, one of the best years of my life. I had the best time, and I started writing.
What a good investment.
Yeah, it was a great investment, right?
Yeah.
I started writing to theater producers. Back then, it was like the 90s. And so there was no internet or whatever, so I had to find it like a magazine that somehow had a list of theater producers in London.
And you're handwriting letters.
And I'm handwriting all these letters, and I'm getting letters back, "Oh, darling, lovely, so glad you want to come, but unfortunately, we don't have anything for you," And so I just decided to go anyway. And I started knocking on doors, literally knocking on doors. And I ended up at some theater company, and they were like, "Why on earth would we want to hire you? You're an American." And I was like, "Well, because I'll work for free, and I'm smart, and I'll be helpful." And they were like, "Okay, great." So I ended up working for this not-for-profit, what their version of not-for-profit theater company would have been. And it taught me so much. I was in the press and marketing department, and one of the people who worked there was also a commercial producer on the West End, and so I got to see the differences between this and this, and it was just such a great basis for me to start a theater career. When I left there, and unfortunately, England wasn't as open with their immigration policies as they seem to be now, I was forced out after a year and decided to move to New York, because back in those days, it was sort of like, if you wanted to move to New York, if you wanted to work in theater, you had to move to New York City.
Yeah,
so regional theater was alive, but it wasn't pervasive around the country the way that it is now. Now a lot of cities have their version of Gulfshore Playhouse, their professional theater, which is all producing everything they do and hiring actors out of New York or professional theaters from other markets. But back then it was still New York, so I went to work on Broadway.
And so that was sort of like a a master's program in and of itself. It was some way for you to you got a whole other culture in
Yep.
your life, though, a lot of value in
Totally.
that experience. And then you had to make it on a budget. You had to do it on a budget. You had to do it in a certain way, and all on your own. Did you
My boyfriend at the time was had just graduated as well, and he got into some program that allowed him to go work for a year as well. So he did that, and I did this, and it was great. We went over there for a year.
So then you lived in the city?
And then I lived in New York City. I moved to New York City. I lived there for 10 years. I was working with Broadway producers. So I was working first for Walt Disney Theatrical Productions, which was great fun because they had just launched Beauty and the Beast on Broadway. And that was their first Broadway show. That was Disney's first foray into Broadway production, and they didn't know what they were doing. They were like, we got animated feat classics and we know what to do with theme parks, but they had no idea what to do with Broadway. So they had hired a whole slew of Broadway types and who were just, like I said, theater people are a little more out of the box, much more self-expressive, not like corporate America, So here we've got Disney, corporate America, who are saying, you want to fly a scenic designer from Burbank to New York, you've got to get 3 signatures and fill this out in triplicate and do this. And I've got, the guy who runs all of the labor unions in New York City going, wow, they want me to get 3 signatures. Gotta get that guy in here, whatever. And I'm, 25 years old or whatever I was, laughing my head off, I started as a receptionist for Walt Disney Theatrical, and I ended up being their international production coordinator because what happened was they were figuring out how to do Broadway pretty quickly. Beauty and the Beast took off, and we were now in the process of sending it to Japan and Australia and Vienna and London and whatever. So that was fun and cool, and I just worked in London, so that worked out well. And then I went to work for Andrew Lloyd Webber's company, the Really Useful Group. Working on Sunset Boulevard, and I eventually went on a tour with Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, all as like a manager, behind the scenes, what they call general manager, company manager, things like that.
On tour?
On tour.
So you
First
were
on
living in
Broadway. Sunset Boulevard was on Broadway, and then on tour.
Like living out of a suitcase? What
What they really call a bus and truck. So Artist Naples, for example, is a performing arts center. The way that they're different than us is we produce everything we do. We produce everything we do. We have a 25,000 square foot production center off of Airport Road, and we build all of the huge sets that you'll see on our stage, and we create the costumes that they wear, and we paint the props, and we paint the sets, and we do everything. Artist Naples, being a performing arts center, they receive tours, and so they're a venue, not really a producer. They're a presenter, not a producer.
Okay.
And so tours will go around literally in buses and trucks, right? The set is driving around in 8 or 9 trucks. The cast is driving around in a bus, and they'll stop, let's say in Naples. The doors will open, the set will come off. In a day, they'll load it all in, and that night they're performing, and they'll perform for a week in this town, and then they'll get back on the bus, and they'll go somewhere else.
Okay.
So I was on the trip with everybody else. I was on the bus or the plane, whatever it was, and we would go to the next town and set up again and break it all down and go to the next town.
Yeah.
It's hard work.
Yeah.
It's hard work.
Yeah.
It's rigorous for sure. But it was great fun, and I was young, and I got to see a bunch of little towns in America I never would have seen before. I never would see again either. And you learn a lot, when you're off on your own like that, having to take on something like that and be in a management position and having to please all these people, actors coming at you. I needed a king size bed, or my mattress is too soft, and where am I supposed to cash my check? And how dare you? I have no place to do my laundry. All that kind of stuff. It's just like, oh my God. And meanwhile, I wanted to do more of the actual art of the theater.
Yeah.
So when I came back from that tour, back at the home office in New York, we closed sooner than we expected to. And they said, we thought you were going to be on tour a year, so we replaced your job in the office, and now we don't have a job anymore for you. And I said, that's great, because I want to get more into the creative side of theater. I majored in directing, as you knew. And, all that sort of management and behind the scenes and looking at a computer just didn't feel like working on art. And I wanted to pursue directing. So I ended up working as a stage manager, as a what we call a production assistant on big Broadway shows for a little bit, assistant directoring to a great director on a few shows that he was working on, both on Broadway and in regional theaters, and eventually directed a feature film of my own, actually, an independent film, and then realized I would never want to ever work in the movie business again, and got into theater. So that was the way that. Hi.
Oh, hi. Hi. Oh, good. Okay, thank you. You found us. Yeah. Awesome.
Thank you. and started started working more on shows of my own. I started directing in universities, and I started directing here and there, and little by little, just became a director as well. So that when that accidental trip to Naples, Florida happened, and I,
Accidental.
by some chance, ended up staying at the Bayfront Inn on Fifth, which at that time in 2004 was a Comfort Inn.
Yes, yes.
And then convinced my at that time husband to move to Bayfront, and became a customer of Robert Philadelphia back in 2004.
Thank you.
You're
very
welcome.
much.
You're welcome. Decided to start Gulfshore Playhouse right out of the condo, because it just seemed like, why do we have a great performing arts center and a good community theater, which uses amateurs and volunteers and people who are bankers by day and actors by night, which is totally different than a professional theater. Why don't we have a professional theater in this town? It didn't make sense. Meanwhile, don't get me wrong, artists brings in professionals, but they, like I said, they're coming in on the bus and they're leaving.
Yeah,
But we go to New York, we hire Broadway people and people you've seen on TV and movies or whatever, and they're coming down for 2 months to live with us. We have to put them up and get them cars and everything for 4 weeks of rehearsal, 4 weeks of performance, or 5 or 6 weeks of performance. And so it's a really different model completely. And so I thought, I think we should do this here. It seems like a good idea. It seems like an arts-loving market. It seems like a perfect niche to fill. And so right away, when I decided to move to Naples, I decided to start Gulfshore Playhouse. I had to think of the name. I went back to New York while we were looking for houses. We were sitting on the deck. Okay, you can edit this however you want. We were sitting on the deck of the hotel, which will overlook Bayfront.
Yes.
I looked at my ex-husband, who was my husband at the time, and who was French and still is. And I said, you know, we should just go home and sell the co-op. It was post 9/11. I was not happy in New York anymore. I felt like I was hitting walls and I didn't know what to do. I needed to get out. I was like, I either need to figure out where else I can do theater or join the Peace Corps. Like one of these things needs to happen. And I don't know why. You know, in my second career, I would have always been a National Geographic photographer, but I think it was too late for that, you know. So I said, let's just go sell the co-op and let's just move here to Bayfront. And he was like, okay. And so we did. And so while that was all in process and happening, I went to a lawyer friend of mine in New York who was also a Broadway producer. And I said, look, I've got this idea. There's this beautiful city that I'm now going to move to, and it doesn't have a professional theater, and I think I'm going to start one, you know, but I don't have any money. I don't know anybody at all. I don't even have a name for the place, but is it too soon to start? And he said, nope. It'll take you a year to get your 501c3, the not-for-profit designation. Little known fact, outside of Broadway, all theater in America is a not-for-profit. It's because you know the difference between the Broadway prices, which now are like $500 a ticket, and our prices that start at $35 a ticket. And the reason why is because we can rely equally as much on philanthropy as we do ticket prices, ticket sales to keep ourselves in business. And that helps us, you know, keep the price affordable and accessible to all, which I believe in really, fundamentally as an art form, you know, that theater should be accessible to everybody. In fact, that $35 ticket, even if we use dynamic pricing, our prices go up, those back rows that are $35 never go up, and somebody can come 2 hours before the show and get a rush ticket for half price, so they can really watch a Broadway level quality show for $17.50.
Wow.
Which is really important to me to keep that accessibility available. So he said to file you for your not-for-profit, it'll take about a year to get it. So in the meantime, figure out a name, find 3 board members, hit the ground running, and see what you can do. My naivete is that there was no theater space. You know, in New York, there's theater, like some abandoned something on every corner that you can turn into a theater, or it is a theater, or it was a theater, or, you know, it's the attic of a theater, you know, whatever it is. And in Naples, that didn't exist at all. So it became much more about a property space that we could get. So I thought up the name Gulfshore Playhouse because I knew I wanted to create what we call regional theater. In the business, we call it regional theater. So I was like, well, how do we label the region? You know, sometimes theaters are called, you know, 4th Street Playhouse, or, you know, the Dock Playhouse or whatever. It's like based on its geography. I was like, I don't know where we're going to end up someday. So I guess I'll call it Gulfshore Playhouse to kind of like make sure I've covered, you know, hedged my bets. And needed 3 board members. And like I said, I knew nobody in this town. So I asked my realtor to be my first board member. And thank God he said yes, because I don't know what would have happened after that. Who else would I have asked? And he worked for John R. Wood Realtors. So he brought me to Phil Wood, the president, and said, and I told him my story just like that. I mean, that was the story. There's nothing much more to it than that. I had 2 pieces of paper in my little folder. And I told him what I wanted to create, which at the moment already in 2004, the dream was, I had to write a short and long-term goals for the government application. My short-term goal, I just looked at this last night, as a matter of fact, for some odd reason. But the short-term goals were like, put on a play, start a capital campaign. I don't even know why I would have said a short-term goal was start a capital campaign. Hire some staff or something was my short-term goal. But my long-term goal was create a theater and education center with a 99-seat black box and a 399-seat main stage and all the classrooms and rehearsal rooms that go along with it. So that was in 2004.
Wow.
And that document still exists. Wow. And it took 20 years to get there.
That detailed? You had an education center in there? You had the rooms? You had it down to like that?
That detailed. And it's how close we got. I mean, I said 99 seats and 399. We're at 125 seats in the black box and about 368 in the main stage. So it's about as close as you can get 20 years later.
Wow.
So it was just like keeping the dream in front of me all the time.
It fascinates me how it was a risk, number one, just moving here, just packing up, saying I'm leaving there and going here. But not only that, you had nothing here. You had no roots. You had nobody here. You're just coming in raw, like completely.
Yeah.
And then seeing this need and planting this flag or making this declaration that this shall be without anything. And that to me is, I mean, there's no blanket, there's no security, there's nothing there at all.
There's only, whatever the proceeds were from selling my apartment in New York City, you know what I mean? That I was sort of like, because I didn't get paid for, 6 years, I guess I didn't get paid. And yeah, it's insanity. I would say that I very often said to myself, I'm either crazy or courageous, and I don't know which. I'm either stupid or, I'm either completely stupid or I'm enlightened. I'm not sure, but it was it was hard. The hard part was the hanging on, because when I think about all of I heard a phrase. It's interesting because there aren't a lot of female artistic directors in the country at professional theaters, but there are a lot of women who are founders of regional theaters, which is fascinating. So one of the first founders of the theater that's now called Arena Stage in Washington, D.C., was a woman by the name of Zelda Fish-Chandler. And I remember seeing a video of her not too long ago, maybe 10 years ago or so. She was talking about self-donation, the idea of self-donation. And when I think about it, I feel that way. And not to be like, it's more like, my ex-husband is not my ex-husband. It was sort of like, people always ask, well, what happened? I say, well, the husband went up against the theater and the theater won, and that's what happened. He wanted to leave Naples. And I was like, I started this thing. And he said, well, it's not really anything yet. And I kept saying, but it will be, but it will be. And he said, I've got a job offer in Hong Kong. And I said, well, have fun, enjoy it. I am not going to move to Hong Kong. What would I do? What would I have done in Hong Kong? I didn't speak Chinese and wouldn't have been able to find an American speaking theater in Hong Kong. Maybe, who knows? But we were already well down the road. And like I said, for the first 3 years, there was no pay. There was no infrastructure. There was no anybody. There was no staff.
Yeah.
But what there was my little office in the back of my condo in Bayfront. And if you remember back in 2004, 2005, this whole area was still called Grand Central Station, remember?
Oh, yes. Grand Central. Yeah.
Nothing was happening at Grand Central Station, which was, of course, hilarious for a former New Yorker like me. And the only thing that even was running there was the Wellness Center, the Briggs, what's now called the Briggs Wellness Center at CH. And it was just weeds in the parking lot. I mean, it was just an eyesore.
Yeah. With the name Grand Central Station.
With the name Grand Central Station, right? The biggest dichotomy. And also how weird, the gateway to downtown Naples. Downtown Naples is adorable, and here's this horrible, abandoned strip mall. And so I would stand on my balcony and look across the street and look out at that land, close my eyes, and imagine a theater coming up out of the land. Over and over again, I did that. Back then it was The Secret and Oprah Winfrey and, Manifest and Visualize. And for 10 years, I lived in Bayfront from 2004 to 2014. And at some point or another, too, the Secret had all these workbooks and worksheets and stuff. So I printed out a huge, more than life-size check that was a blank check. And I wrote a check to Gulfshore Playhouse for $10 million from Patty and Jay Baker. And, so over those 10 years, we grew from zero. I wasn't getting paid. The first 3 years, I didn't get paid. The second 3 years, I was the board, now that I had assembled, voted to give me $15,000 a year. But we couldn't afford to pay me $15,000 a year. So I deferred that too for the next 3 years. And so, at some point, probably in 2010, I think.
People should hear that again, though. $15,000 a year. So people now are complaining about $25 an hour. So if you're getting $15,000 a year to live on.
Deferred.
It didn't even go to you.
No.
Right? Someday you might get it.
Someday. I did get it eventually. So, but so we couldn't afford to hire staff. We couldn't afford it. Everything was like me, myself, and I. If we had enough money, 2 sticks to rub together and make a budget, I would hire a stage manager and some actors, and we would do a play at the Norris Center. We didn't get into the Norris Center full time until after the downturn, because there was a community theater group in there that went under as a result of the downturn, and they had space, and the city of Naples wanted to make money on renting that space. And so I said, yes.
This is the North Center at Cambier?
This is the North Center at Cambier. And that's where we produced from 2006 till 2020. I mean, 2020, when did we move here? 2024. We were there all that time.
Okay.
But it wasn't really full-time until about 2009, 2010. And once that happened, then we started to try to talk about office space and hiring a person or two to have on staff, So it took a good 6-7 years. And from the 2010 to 2014, we finally had about 20 people that worked for us, which was a ton. And we were over $1 million budget, and it was all very exciting. But meanwhile, I had that little check in my bathroom cabinet. And I would look out here, and I'd visualize. And around 2014, I guess, so we were 10 years in, I told my board, I said, look, the Norris Center, literally the Norris Center stage is about the size of this room. I mean, it is tiny, 20 by 20 feet. And no wing space, no fly space, no anything that you need. Theater, good theater, big theater. Good theater is usually big theater, and big theater needs infrastructure. And so without infrastructure, you're forced to do either like really scaled down versions of shows, like we did a 10-person, 2-piano My Fair Lady, which is usually 50 people on stage and lots of lush dancing and everything. People loved it because it was really well conceived and, minimal and to the extreme and really cool. And so people loved it. But still, it's not like you don't want to do that every time. You want to be able to do like how we opened this building was with anything goes, 24 people on stage, 3-story high boat, and just, all the bells and whistles, amazing tap dancing and, all the stuff. That's what you want to be able to do. And so when you have to do a 10-person, 2-piano My Fair Lady, it's just, it's crushing in some way as a theater maker, You're like, yeah, that's cool. I'm so glad we created that. But I also want to do this, So I went to the board and I said, here's the thing. We've been at this now for 10 years. And I said, and I don't know how much longer I can bring my creativity to this, because I don't know how many much more small plays there are and how many more large-scale plays we can reduce down. And I said, so we really need to start looking for land. So we ended up coming across a guy who did this for us for free. He helped us start to look for land and figure out where. We looked everywhere from Sanibel Island, Lee County, Collier County, downtown, uptown.
So you were open to anything.
We were open to everything, right? We were open to everything. We were looking. 2014, Patty and Jay Baker came into our midst around 2009. I think they sponsored a show. They sponsored our show Tartuffe for $5,000 and that was their first gift to us. And they started coming to everything. Patty was a college, she majored in it in college. She loved directing. She loved theater.
Really?
She loves theater. She's a Tony voter. She's a Broadway producer. Any which way that she can get her hands on theater, she will. She loves it, which is just so awesome. I love that there are people like that in this world who are willing to support theater, because arts are not the first thing people support. The top 3 donations are people's alma maters, their hospital, or what's the third one? Healthcare, education, and church, and their church. So arts are like 4% of giving or 6% of giving on anybody's to-do list. So to have somebody like the Bakers, first of all in this town, but in the country in general, is just, we're all so lucky.
Yeah.
And so they came into our midst. Somewhere along the line, I wrote that check. In 2014, I moved out of Bayfront. And at that time, I opened the cabinet, and so that check was pasted in there to Gulfshore Playhouse, $10 million, Patty and Jay Baker. And I ripped it down. And I said, this doesn't work. And 1 year later, pretty much to the day, the Bakers gave us $10 million.
Wow. Oh, man. That's the secret in action.
That's the secret in action.
Wow.
It is.
Yeah.
This is why one of the first PowerPoint slides that I have when I do a speaking engagement is said, like, I'm being a founder, a manifestor, and an entrepreneur, because that story is worth telling. Like, I feel like it worked. You know what I mean? And I don't feel like I had any special powers or anything. Like, I feel like those are the laws of the universe, and they actually worked.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And so...
Yeah.
But keeping the vision in front of you is the most important thing. You can't give up. You cannot give up. And I think the only thing that kept propelling me through all the dark years, because to go back to the notion of self-donation, is like, there were so many years that I was single, and I would be working till 3 o'clock in the morning every morning on my couch with the thing, tying the bows on the gifts we were going to give out to the patrons the next day for this little cocktail party we were having, whatever it was. I did it. I was willing to do it. I had almost, I had no friends. My friends were in New York or Washington, D.C. because I just never took time to, like, make social connections here because I was working my butt off. And my mother was yelling at me, don't you know when to say when? Like, this isn't working. When are you going to get a real job? And I just kept the vision in my head, first of all, of what that sheet of paper said. And I really do think, looking back, that it was the fear of missing out. Like, I thought to myself every time that I was about to give up, and believe me, there were many times that I was like, but I can't give up because this might be the moment that it turns.
Yeah.
And then I would miss out on this.
Yeah.
And now that I know what this became, I'm so happy that I didn't give up.
Wow. And there were so many things that were getting in the way that were there that you didn't let stop you. Because there's a lot of stuff that's happening between hurricanes, between pandemics, between economic turndowns, between Naples being Naples, between changes in government, there's so many things.
Oh, yes, my friend. Yeah, we can't talk about some of that, but we will talk about hurricanes and pandemics. The politics are hard too. They really are. I mean,
you have to wear so many hats.
Yeah.
To get this done.
Yeah, when you talk about getting a master's, right? I feel like I've had 4 masters, because it's like masters in politics, masters in city planning, masters in construction, masters in, running a company, masters in directing, whatever it might be. Like, I've had 5, I think.
Yeah, easily. You couldn't even take any one of those disciplines. I mean, if you took an MBA and whatever all those things put together, wouldn't have gotten this result. It was that passion and that whatever's inside you. It is very unique because you had to be so many different people for so many people. For so many different reasons. Yeah. I mean, the all of it was crushing. And that's not even just the basic story, right? The basic story is like 2009 when I look at my board chairman at lunch and I say, look, we just did 2 shows. They went well. People liked them. Back then it was like 100 people a night, 50 people a night coming. It wasn't gangbusters. And we want to finally do this big show, Tartuffe, which was the one actually that Patty sponsored first. The first show Patty sponsored. But I went to my board chair and I said, look, we need to give $35,000 to the Actors Equity Association by Friday, because back then we were on a certain kind of contract, and the Actors Equity Association is the professional actors union. And they required us to give them enough money to cover 2 weeks of salary in advance of starting rehearsals, because we were small back then. And so we still have to actually do this in a much more formidable way, in a much more official and formal way. Now we still have to bond, and now we have to give them, $100,000 every time we were about to start a season. But back then it was on a per show basis. So on this show, we owed them 2 weeks' salary for these 8 actors because we were going to do our first sort of big show. That was big for us, $35,000. And I said, we just don't have it. I said, we've been trying. I've been trying. So unless you help me find $35,000 by Friday, this was 2009, we're going to have to close down. And I said, and if we're going to have to close down, we were 5 years old by that point. I said, I think this is the sign from the universe that I'm supposed to close it all down. And he showed up 2 days later with $35,000. 7 people sponsored us, $5,000 each for that show. Wow. And that was the turning point. So those are the little stories. Like the big stories are 2 major hurricanes. I mean, Irma was horrible for us. We had to cancel a show. Our housing was flooded. Ian was worse. Yes. And this goes back to city politics, because it took us so long to get our site plan application approved. We were delayed. That was right at the time coming out of the pandemic that everything was starting to inflate. Yes. So our budget went up $6 million just like that because we were delayed for an entire year. Man. And we would have been installing steel 1 week later
1 week after Hurricane Ian came through, we were supposed to be installing steel on the building. Had we installed steel on the building, then 2 out of the 3 walls that were up wouldn't have fallen down, and we wouldn't have been delayed another 6 months. We were actually supposed to open a year ago last January, but we only opened in November because of what Hurricane Ian did. So it all goes together.
Yeah.
And that's what people don't realize when they're voting, what the real impacts are in terms of who we're voting for.
Well, then I look at the restaurants over here, and I look at this whole area, and the impact that this has on this area. When I look back at Grand Central Station, and the weeds, for a long time it was like that, and now see that what this draws into the area and what it brings and how it supports so much of this community. It's a big deal. It has a big impact on Naples in a lot of ways.
It's wild. I mean, theaters are known to be economic impactors. This is a known thing because this is why you hear about theaters all the time that are put into areas of what they call blight. I mean, in many cities, it really is blight. This was called blight. By Naples, This isn't really blight.
Right.
It never really was. But still, Grand Central Station and the weeds, right? Yeah. And so in Minneapolis, on the banks of the river, they put the Guthrie Theater, and now there's all kinds of high-rise buildings and all kinds of stuff going on. And Denver, downtown Denver, was horrible, like a warehouse district. They put the Denver Center, and now it's a cool, hip, arty area, and that's what happens. So, and we know this. And city people should, city governments should know it as well, I think. And the cool thing was that guy that we got to work for us for free, he eventually became our owner's rep, and he was a good owner's rep, but he was a great former city manager, and he knew how cities thought. So he knew we ultimately identified this space, which was amazing, right? Because here it was, like, this was the spot where I was visualizing all the time, that it was available, and we talked them into selling it to us. And that was amazing. And at first they were like, well, we don't really know. Our people who are buying Naples Square, they might not want a theater there. They might rather have a grocery store. And I was like, are you kidding me? A theater's going to be amazing, whatever. Yeah. And they were like, well, we don't know. So Patty and Jay had given us the money in May of 2015. And in late 2015, we were making the negotiation to get this spot. So in January of 16, I'm driving to the lawyer's office with a $50,000 check in my hand to put down the deposit and sign the deal. And I get a call from the lawyer, and he says, pencils down. They don't want to sell you the land anymore. They don't believe you've got the money. And we couldn't release the knowledge that Penny and Jay had given us this $10 million until February of 2016 because we were having a gala and we were going to make a big deal out of it, and it was a big secret until then. And no matter what I did, they wanted to build I don't know what they wanted to do, a grocery store, I think. I don't know what happened. I don't know if they changed their mind. I don't know if the grocery store said no. I don't know if the city said no. To this day, I do not know what happened. But I was the whole time like, wait a minute, how can this happen? I was visualizing, you know what I mean? That's not how it's supposed to work. So for another year and a half, we looked for more somewhere else, another piece of land.
Oh gosh, you were so close to it. You thought you had it.
We were so close. And we had a couple of leads on a couple of things that were just, I think, not ever going to really work out. And the owners of Naples Square came back to us and they said, oh, well, we're just kidding, we changed our minds. And I was like, okay, great. And they said, but it'll be an extra $1 million. And I was like, absolutely not. We've got leads on 2 other places. My donors will never go for another $1 million. And so, sorry, thanks. And they were like, okay, just kidding. You can have it for $5 million. And so, thank God. So now,
knowing that it's a not-for-profit too. I mean, that they're you were upfront about what was going here. It wasn't like you were coming here to be
that's right.
a restoration hardware or something.
Exactly.
Right.
We weren't nobody was gonna get rich off of this in any way, shape, or form,
Yeah.
except hopefully the citizens of Naples, right?
Right.
An enrichment.
Yeah.
In a different kind of way. But so we bought it. It was signed, sealed, and delivered in November of 2017. And this guy, who was the former city manager, he's like, okay, now here's what you have to do. You just bought these 3 acres. So we bought these 2 acres for the building and then a strip next to us for the parking lot. That was the original thought. Then beyond that strip was the strip where Wynn's Catering was. And it was like an old 1970s bunker that used to be a cement factory. It was not pretty. And he said, here's what you got to do. Go to the Wynn family and ask them if they would be willing to do a land swap with you. Tell them that you'll give them the frontage along First Avenue. That will be good for them. They'll be happy. That's more valuable land. They'll say yes. And tell them you want to do something nice. You want them to do something nice, like a nice mixed-use building. and to build some office space so you could have office space, because we already knew the building price of this was, $859 to between $850 and $1,000 a square foot for this building. There was no way we could afford to put offices in here, even though we would have wanted to. So he was coming up with a great idea. Tell them to do that. If they put office space in there, you can rent office space right there. It'll be right across the street. I said, okay. And then he said, and so if they take that and they do the land swap, then they'll have the frontage on First Avenue, and behind there will be another acre that will be left, and that will be yours. Go to the city of Naples and tell them you want to donate the acre to them if they'll build a public parking garage on it, because this is going to explode. People don't realize it yet, but you won't, this 120 parking spaces that you would have in that parking lot, nobody wants to look at a parking lot, and it won't be enough. You're going to need more.
Yeah.
So I go to the city of Naples. Hello, city of Naples, I want to donate an acre of land to you over there where nothing's going on. And they were like, now why would we want to do that? Why, if we're going to invest the money to build a fourth parking garage in Naples, why in the world would we want it to be there? And I was like, well, let me tell you about 2022. Back then I thought it was 2022. It turned out to be 2024. But, let me tell you what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And the truth is, when people go to see theater, they go somewhere else first, right? They go to dinner, they go to shop, or they go Valley Park, or maybe even sometimes they're driving to another location and they're staying at a hotel and they're seeing a thing, whatever it is. And so there's a lot of money invested. So this is why you see the growth. There's an article in Naples Daily News when Ingrid Aielli said, we're putting Grappino here because we know Gulfshore Playhouse is coming. AC Marriott was tied to our hip as we were walking through the approval process, and they were like, us too.
Yes.
And they were coming here because they knew we were coming here.
Yes.
And the Winds are going to build that beautiful building. The garage is there. Now the district is here. So all these things, Warren Whiskey, the collective, all these things are coming ever since the announcement. We bought the land. Like I said, we closed on land in 2017, but we really broke ground in late 2021. So especially around then, 2020 and 21, when everyone knew, it was like, oh, it's happening.
Yeah.
Then all the excitement started to happen. All this stuff started to explode and to blossom. And that's no surprise, because that's what happens when you put a theater somewhere. So it's very exciting.
Yeah.
To be part of the swell,
Yeah.
And
well, I even see how that with the canoe races that are back, the city was trying to persuade them to go to Baker Park instead of where they used to go.
Where were they before?
Used to be at the dock.
Oh, at the dock.
Yeah, and
Wow.
the city said absolutely not now. It's too much. It's it's the regulations have changed and things have changed. So with Baker Park right there, the city was urging them to go this way, and then they said, well, we have this parking garage.
And the parking garage that finally opened. It was
Yes.
supposed to be open a year ago. It opened on May 8th, I think, or 9th. We closed our first whole season on May 4th. So never too late.
Oh, really?
But we made it. They allowed us to Valley Park people, and we did. So that's good.
Oh, yeah. Well, so that's Ripple there, because they're saying now the canoe race is coming back again.
That's
because
cool.
it makes for more use of Baker Park. I guess they're allowing a band and alcohol sales and everything. It's a big deal. They're going to let it go.
Great.
I know.
I miss the Naples we used to have with like music playing everywhere.
Yeah. Because they got so mad about Bayfront doing music, and there was somebody there who wouldn't let that happen. But yeah, at least that we have that.
I have a lot to say about that. I lived in Bayfront for 10 years. I moved there from New York City because I moved there from New York City. And so I thought living in Bayfront would be cool with music playing. And sometimes, you know what, it was loud. And so I closed my doors, and I was just like, I'm not, into that tonight. And other nights I was standing on my balcony listening to the music, and it's something you sign up for, I feel like, when you move into a mixed use area.
You're going to live there, right. That's
so
the
why
whole
are you
point
going to
of
bother
it.
complaining about it? Like, I don't understand. You moved
Pick
there.
the
You could
wrong
have moved to a
spot.
really quiet spot and been quiet.
Right.
I just don't get it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
but.
the appeal of it. Well, I love that, and now that I understand that, because I heard those guys talking about the canoe races, and they were saying that they're going to be using this area. So again, that's one more thing that, the ripple effect that this continues to have.
That's cool.
And you did it debt-free?
We did. Well, yes, we did. I mean, we've run in the black every single year, even pandemic years and everything else. We always ended up in the black. So that means no debt, no deficit. And we have a bridge loan right now because we've got a lot of pledges for the capital campaign that are over 5 years. And so it's not, I don't consider it a debt in the real sense.
Right,
because
there's money coming in to pay for it.
Yeah, we know that money's coming in. Wow. And so, we've got about $3 million, I would say, to go on the capital campaign, but we've got people are very generous and very excited about the building, and so we'll finish that up in the next several months.
To be able to do that with all the overruns and with the way things are, I mean, you get a quote and it's never what it's going to be. There's always something they find that, oh, we found rock underground. We have to chip that up. There's
It
another.
is infuriating to the nth degree. I'm so glad I'm a theater maker and not in construction. That's all I have to say.
Yeah.
I can't wait for every little thing to be finished in this building, and
Yeah.
I will cook,
But you had to get people in so many different arenas to align on this vision that you had, like a lot. And it wasn't, your background wasn't that. So that's what's kind of cool. I mean, I think it's fascinating to me to see that you pulled this off. I mean, it's really.
The way we do one thing is the way we do everything. And thank God I'm a director, because I have the eye for detail already, like, oh, that looks crooked on the set, or, like, I want the molding to be something different on the set, so I think I had the penchant for it, because what I learned was this. I'm shocked at. I felt like very often it was up to me to have the creative idea about the architecture, and I was like, I don't understand. Like, I'm not an architect.
Yeah.
This should be your ideas. Like, you should be going, we could do this or we could do that.
Right.
We've got 3 different ideas. Which one do you like? I thought that's the way it was going to go, and instead I was always like, but what if it's higher? What if it's got more this or that? I couldn't believe it, and I also thought, they would be responsible for like making it look beautiful at the end. I picked that slab. We picked that wallpaper. Like, in the end, it wasn't the architects who decided. It was like the touches.
Yeah.
And I had no idea that was true. We were layered up with consultants, and no consultant ever said, keep your eye on everything.
Yeah.
Do not let them own the subs. You should own all the subcontractors. That's a piece of advice to anyone getting into construction.
Yeah.
Don't let the architects own the subcontractors, and watch like a hawk, because they will never care as much as you care,
Yeah.
and they won't make it as pretty as you want it to be. That's what I learned at the very almost tail end of construction. I said, I just don't understand why you guys aren't talking about finishes with me. We want the paneling, we want the wallpaper. Like, here's the truth, Kristen. Most professional theaters in America run out of money by the time they get to the end. We're not used to having to talk to people about finishes.
Wow.
And I was like, really? I thought it was like a design aesthetic that was like popular in the 80s and 90s of making regional theaters, professional theaters out of concrete and metal. I just thought they thought it was cool. And I was always like, I don't want to build a theater that looks like concrete and metal. I want it to be pretty. And little did I know it's because everybody ran out of money. But I said, this is Naples. We did not run out of money. In fact, we just made a deal with our board to raise the capital campaign amount so that we could make sure everything was really pretty.
Yeah.
And they were like, okay, well, yeah. And so we ended up working with Lisa Con Allen, who's an interior designer here, who was so helpful in saying, what about this wallpaper? Or what about, let me take you to the slab yard and we can pick out a slab, and making sure that the touches were really what we wanted them to be.
Yeah,
And
well, you
so-
can really tell. I mean, the detail, the beauty of every area here, is impeccable.
Thank you.
And I think it's probably unique too that because of your background that you were able to make this exactly the way it's needed to be. Like I know when we would build out salons, you'd take an architect or somebody from a design, from a drafting perspective to put things together, but they don't know the functionality. They don't know
Right.
the flow, what the flow needs to
Right.
be. They don't have that mind at all. So they're just putting things that they think. I remember we had one architect who was doing here, and he was using the technology from the 50s when they had the old barber's chairs where they had to actually put them into the concrete, the old barber's chairs.
Whoa.
And he was designing this. He said, he needed an engineer to design the way a barber chair, salon chairs are just, they sit on the ground. He was so
Yeah.
far out of touch.
Wow.
But
Yeah,
and
seriously.
you being able to see what it really needs, because you've been to so many and had such a background in that, to be able to make it the way that's functional and useful and
Yeah, I
and it
mean,
flows.
we had this kind of consultant and that kind of, we had theater consultants, we had all these things, and in the end, we ended up paying a little bit of money to our scenic designer or a lighting designer, or like our trusted ones that we use over and over again, saying, "Can you take a look at these plans and tell us if this is going to suit us?" And I can't tell you how many times, like especially the lighting designers, Kristen Coury will never be satisfied with this. And I was like, why? What's wrong with it? They're like, there won't be enough side light. There won't be enough backlight. And I was like, well, what do we need to do now? The theater's designed. How can we fix it? They're like, okay, well, you just need to this and this and this and this. But if they hadn't told me that, we would have ended up putting up the theater, and then it would have been like, I hate the lighting. How would I have known that?
Yeah.
It takes vigilance beyond
like
compare.
no other. Yeah,
Yes, like
you
no
got
other.
it. You got it.
It's shocking. I was shocked by that. That was really a learning.
Was there something with the water and the hurricane with the table or the way the theater is with the water and the?
No, actually, because we are in a floodplain here, and so I mean yes, but no. So there was no issue with the water, not even
Okay.
during the hurricane, because we're in a floodplain. And because we're in a floodplain, we actually brought in $1 million worth of dirt. So we brought in we raised the theater up 12 feet. So you notice you have to walk up a hill to get in.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
we built the hill. We wanted to build the castle on the hill, so we had to build the hill. And so when you come up into the theater, you go into the main theater. Which, have you seen the main theater? I have to show you the
I
theater.
did.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I did.
You
And I
could-
walk on the stage and I.
Oh, okay,
I
great.
just, it was so cool.
Awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, good. And you walk in, and then you kind of slope deck down. That's the way theaters are built. So when you're at the bottom of our orchestra section in the main stage, you're still above floodplain. And but if we'd put in an orchestra pit in the side note, if we had put in an orchestra pit in the main stage, we would have been back into the water table. So we actually created a room, a soundproofed room up in our education wing where the orchestra plays, and it's all piped in and then mixed in the room to sound like it's all there. You know what I mean? And it sounds, it's like clean. It sounds so good. But therefore, in Hurricane Ian, like I said, we only had three. We had the back wall of the main stage and the two side walls of the main stage up. Those were the only concrete. That was the only concrete in the whole building. And so those were up, and the two side walls fell down. And but the water, which you remember, Fifth Avenue was flooded. They were like airboating through Fifth Avenue and everything else. Only came halfway up our hill, thank goodness. Which also proves to us now that the building's built, we hope that means we have the next big one, and hopefully we don't ever anytime. That hopefully the water will only come up halfway up the hill, and it won't hopefully encroach the building.
Well, you had already planned for that, so to have the orchestra in a different place rather than down low because of the way you.
But I mean, if we got 12 feet of water, you know what I mean? It would come in the front doors and everything else. But I mean, that would be 12 feet of water.
Yeah.
Would be catastrophic for
Yeah.
everybody.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Ian was just something we've never had. As all the years I've been here, we never had anything that had a lot of wind and wind damage, but never like water like that. That was the one that really. Yeah. It was devastating in a different way than any of the other ones ever were. Wilma, or any of the other ones that we've ever had. So, but you guys are built like a fortress here now, so that's good.
So for us, another piece of good news is that in that wind building on the third floor, we just got permission from the city for them to build 17 studio apartments for us. We'll rent on a 20-year lease. It won't be public housing, or it won't be an Airbnb or anything like that, but it'll be ours. And we'll be able to put our actors there, because right now we have 54 bedrooms all around the county that we rent on an annual basis to put our actors, directors, designers, stage managers, everybody in, because we're bringing everybody.
But you don't think about all
in
that
from
that
other
goes into
places.
it. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
And like $1 million just to bring all these people in.
Yeah.
And then more than that to put them all up and give them cars and everything else.
Yeah.
But a lot of our housing was in an area called Jade Apartments, just over there across from the hospital, first floor housing. And in Irma and Ian, they were both flooded out. And so knowing we have dry, individual studio apartments on the third floor in a new building with built to code will be another relief for us.
Great. And that's another ploy to get people here too, because to be able to come and stay down here, it's a great thing for people to.
That's it. And we rent a lot of two bedroom and 3 bedroom apartments, and so sometimes we get great actors all the time. But sometimes we miss out on that very top actor we would have loved to have had, because they say, if you can't give me my own personal, I don't care if it's 400 square feet, I want to be by myself where I can shut my door and be myself. Even if it's a 2 bedroom, 2 bathroom, and they have their own bathroom, they're like, nope. So that'll help us too with our negotiations.
Yeah. Wow. So many things to piece together to make it all go.
There's a lot. People thinking, what's funny about theater is that people don't think of it as a business. People don't think of it as an infrastructure, a company. We've got 80 people that work for us, and about 150 actors that, artists that come in throughout the year.
Yeah.
We're a huge factory. We got, like I said, the 25,000 square foot shop over there where 50 of our people work, and they're constructing scenery and doing all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
There's so much going on, and people think that magic happens and the set just comes out of the stage and the actors are naturally rehearsed and the show goes on. You know what I mean? It's like the craziest thing. So
how do you, because your true passion is in that room, is with the performance How do you balance that, or how do you keep yourself from going too far one way or too far the other way? How do you do all that? Because you got a lot to
Yeah.
deal with.
When I started Gulfshore, there was a guy in New York City. I used to be a volunteer for something that doesn't exist anymore called the Lark Theater, and it became called something else, the Lark Play Workshop or something like that. I can't remember what, but he was the artistic director for a long time, and he said to me, "Don't ever let them force you to stop doing the thing you love." And I said, "Oh, that's great advice," and I always kept it in my heart. And in the early years, I mean, in the first 12 years, nobody directed any show on a Gulfshore Playhouse stage but me. Not because I was hoarding all the shows. In one sense, I didn't have as much to do as I have to do now, so I had more time to direct, 3 shows a year or whatever it was. We weren't doing a huge season or anything at that point. But it was also because we had so little infrastructure and we had so few staff people, and we didn't even have a costume shop. We had a little closet in the back room that didn't even have an outlet. We had to bring an extension cord so we could set up a sewing machine and build a costume, So it wasn't until 2012, so that was 8 years in, that we first had our first guest director. And then after that, I started to direct less. We started doing more shows. We started doing a 6-show season, and so I would direct 2 or 3 a year. And then in the past few years, as you can imagine, it's been very hectic. I directed 1 in our final season in the Norris Center and 1 this past season. But next season, I'll direct 2 again. And I made sure that I directed 2, because as soon as some time freed up, because there wasn't a molecule of my brain that was left,
Right.
there was so much. But now we're not going to be arguing with City Hall. We're not going to be arguing with construction managers. And we're not going to be, worrying about all this stuff. There's actually some time freed up for me to go back to directing a show, an extra show. And I'm really excited about that. But along the way, I also developed a deep love for managing. I'm the CEO. I run a business with a really good culture, and we're really proud of that. And all of the infrastructures that need to be in place to have all these departments and the huge organizational chart, and communication, and how does that work throughout the company, and how are we with each other, and all of that. And I also have developed a huge love for wanting to serve this great city of ours and the wonderful people in it.
Yeah.
And that has will become, I'm sure, by the time I die, the thing that will matter the most to me is that I was able to impact people's lives in a really fundamental way.
Yeah, you sure have. It's like directing an even bigger show.
Directing an even bigger show. That's right. And that's super exciting. Somebody the other day said to me, I had to do a speaking engagement, and she said, my husband and I got engaged in Marco Island. So we always had this sort of like idea that we were going to retire to Marco Island. And so my husband kept saying, I want to retire to Marco Island. And I was sort of like, I don't want to retire to Marco Island. There's nothing to do out there. I want to come. Can we go to Naples? Because there's lots of arts, there's things to do. And he said, he said yes, they would move to Naples. And she said, so I just want to thank you so much, because you have fundamentally changed my life. You've created a place where I can afford to go and have some magic in my life, and I just can't thank you enough. And it was just like, that's just so amazing. It's the things you don't realize. The thing, I have to say, this is so silly, but as you know, I put on that page in 2004 when I was creating the company to build this theater and education center. But it was because in my mind, I knew that great theater required great infrastructure. So I just wanted to be able to create great theater for people, right?
Yeah.
Hold. Let me take a sip.
Do it.
Am I good?
Yeah. Great.
But what was shocking to me was throughout this whole first season, when people were coming in and going, we're so excited about the building. It makes us proud to live in Naples. And I was like, wow. I can't tell you. I mean, it sounds so stupid that I never thought about the civic contribution of the building itself.
Yeah.
But I just was so focused on the outcomes.
Yeah. Yeah. And now the pride of the community. It's another, it's one more thing that this area that we live in that I love. So it's so hard for me to go on vacation, because this is such a great community. It is so amazing.
It is.
I mean, in so many ways.
And there are so many things that, sorry, let me do that again. There are so many things that are so great about Naples. You go somewhere else and you're like, man, why did I go on vacation?
Yeah.
'Cause I can go home in Naples and have all that.
Yeah, we got everything here. We got it all.
It's true.
There was something you said, and I wanted to learn more about this. The play finishes in the audience.
Did I say that?
You mentioned that the play finishes in the audience. What do you hope people take away when they leave the Gulfshore Playhouse?
Yeah. So, So the thing I said on opening night was, and I guess this is why I never thought about the civic contribution of the actual building, was because for me, the building, it was never about the building. It was always about what the building would allow us to fill the building with. You know, I talk about, in the early days, I talked about,
Let me refill you.
oh, I got this other one. How are we doing on time, Zach? It's 12 what? Oh my God, I talked too much.
No. No. That's when we know it's working. That's good.
So what's good, like 5 more minutes? Like, is that okay? You're so sweet. You keep giving me this. I'm just going to tell this story because this is the good ending, I think.
The great part about this is that it's not just a soundbite. I don't know. That's why I like the podcast format.
It's so cool that you started this. How long have you been doing it?
On and off. A couple years ago, started it, but probably got more serious about it in the last 6 months.
Yeah. Came across some old podcast footage of him once he started out, and I was like, let's read that.
Oh my God, that's super cool.
Yeah.
It's really kind of
Just because you get the whole human, you don't just get the soundbite that, is, I don't know. I like it in a lot of formats. Even listening to Putin when he got interviewed by Tucker was like, that was different to me to hear a different, not just hear the negative sound bites. Not that I like the guy or admire him, or anything, but I got to hear the whole being. Like, who is this guy? And that's who are you? And this is a big deal for our community. This is a really big deal, and you had to do it with so many different. It's fascinating. I still am in awe because it's a lot to accomplish. Especially in this town. Like, it's not easy to get stuff done in Naples, especially with the way government is and the shifting and the changing and the multiple opinions about that people have about stuff, and people are very vocal one way or the other about things. So you got to deal with all of that. Yes. And then you got to deal with even your own family saying, when are you going to get a job? When are you going to, you got to go against a lot of no.
Yes, for sure. And now it's so funny because now that we're here, there are so many people who are willing to come out of the woodwork and tell me how crazy they thought I was. I was like, you think I didn't know that you thought I was crazy all the while? But what I told the audience on opening night was that it was never about the building. It was about this building for me was the body. But I was excited about the soul of the building and what we could fill the building with, and so much more than we've ever been able to do before, right? We've got a huge education department. We do conservatory classes for kids from 5 to 18 and in-school stuff and whatever. And I knew, and we do adult programming, and we do audience engagement, and we do all kinds of stuff. So I knew we could just do more if we had a bigger space to do it in. So I talk about Wednesday. And it was very shortly after we opened the building. We had opened Anything Goes first in our main stage, and then we opened Every Brilliant Thing in our smaller space in the Struthers. And we had a corporate training that our director of education and I were doing together all day. We had understudy rehearsals going on. Kids were rehearsing in 2 spaces, and there were audience engagements for 2 shows, and it was just, the building was alive. Everywhere I walked, every room was being filled. There were kids singing. There were people applauding. There were, whatever. And it was just so exciting to see because that's what I meant when I say that the show finishes with the audience, is that there is none of this that's worthwhile. None of this matters if the audience doesn't come. And we talk about, from a theater making perspective, it's an actual component of what we do. We do something called previews, like a few previews before we actually officially open. Because if it's a comedy, if it's a tearjerker, if it's whatever, you need to know for sure the audience is responding the way you anticipate they'll actually respond. If they're not laughing at that joke, you're working on it for the next 3 days before you open, because you're like, we got to make them laugh here. Like, what are we doing wrong? Did we not say it at the right, There's like this whole but-um-bum thing about comedy. It's math. And so if you go ba-da-da-da-da-da, and the other person goes, "Meh," they're not going to laugh. But if you go ba-da-da-da-da-da, and the other person goes, "Ah," they're going to laugh, and it's just so crazy. Sometimes you just don't know. And sometimes they're laughing at things you didn't expect them to laugh at, and maybe you want to calibrate that. Or they're crying their eyes out, you didn't expect them to cry, you wanted them to cry some other time. So the audience is literally the final component, but it's not just that they help us make the show better. It's that they are the ones we're doing it for. And despite all of this and all the reasons why and all the passion I have about the art and everything else, my covenant is with the audience. And if I am not delivering them good art, then I feel like I'm not doing my job. And that's that.
No, what a powerful statement. I love that. Or just that's what moves you. That's what has you do all this. Yeah.
All of it.
Yeah. How about just for fun? Good, we have cards here too. I'll tell you about those in a minute. So what music's playing while you're in the car or you're in the zone?
That's a good question. It could be anything from the Outlander soundtrack to a crazy mix of like music from the early 2000s, which I absolutely love, or classical music.
If your career was a movie, what would the opening soundtrack be?
My God. There's this song I just listened to from Gypsy, and you'll have to find it. There's an amazing recording of Audra McDonald singing it right now on NBC, and it's called Some People. So you got to listen to that.
Okay. We'll edit that in here. Good. Books or podcasts you love?
Podcasts. I love books. As a kid, I loved to read. But unfortunately now I don't have a lot of time to sit down and read a book. So I listen to a lot of books on tape and I listen to a lot of podcasts.
Yeah, me too. Any that stand out to you? Any that you are your go-tos or that you think, oh, I really
Not
love
that I'm willing to share, but I will tell you that, I will tell you that it turns out that Joe Rogan was listed in Variety this year as one of the most influential people in the they're calling it in show business, which I find fascinating because I don't think what he does is show business. I think what he does is sort of investigative journalism.
Right.
But I do love to listen to Joe Rogan because I think he's always got really interesting people and he really digs deep.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Your coffee order.
Lately, it's been an oat milk latte.
Oat milk latte. Okay. If you weren't the CEO here, what do you think you'd be doing today?
So that's a really good question because now I've lived in Naples for 21 years, so I'm not leaving Naples. So that answer becomes different. Like I mentioned earlier, my second career would have been National Geographic photographer.
Yeah.
That's an alternate universe life, right? So now here I am, like I love Naples and I'm not leaving. So I don't know. I don't want to become a realtor, but who knows? I'd probably have to start something else. Oh, I want to go on a speaking tour and write a book. So maybe just doing that.
Okay. I'll be looking forward to those. What's something about you that most people don't know but should?
A lot of people are surprised that I speak French. I speak a little bit of Italian. I want to teach myself how to speak Spanish because I've decided it's time for me to learn Spanish. So I'm going to do that over the summer. Maybe that.
Cool. Wow. Multilingual too. All right. These are some random questions. Pick a card.
Oh, goodness. All right. My comfort food. Well, here's the thing. I am going to put in a plug for the wonderful IELE group because I am officially in this country gluten-free. I can't eat wheat because of what they've done with it here in America. So I used to love pizza, and I can't eat pizza anymore. I couldn't eat pizza anymore. And so when I would go to Italy or England or wherever, France, I would, splurge on croissants and pizza and everything else because I can eat it over there because they don't mess it up.
Right.
They don't mess it up with all the chemicals.
Yeah. It's very
But
different.
the IELE group, Grappino Bakery, my new favorite place, is they import all their flour from Italy. So it's a problem for my waistline, but it makes me so happy because their pizza is so good and I can eat it.
I didn't know that. I didn't know they
Yes.
did that. Oh, okay. Got to try that out.
And that is truly my comfort food.
All right, one more.
All right. Favorite bar? What do I want to say about that? Does it have to be in Naples or can it be anywhere?
Yeah.
I'm not a big drinker, so my favorite bar is hard. But what I will tell you is that I'm hoping to make my favorite bar. There's my husband and I are going to sort of do a little tour around France and Switzerland this summer. And in Paris, we're going to stay at a place called L'Hôtel, which just means the hotel. And in it, it turns out that Oscar Wilde died in this hotel in 1900. And I'm excited about that because I'm directing The Importance of Being Earnest in the spring, which was written by Oscar Wilde. And they have a bar called Oscar's Bar or Oscar's Lounge or something like that, or Wilde's Lounge or something.
Yeah.
And I'm super excited to experience that bar because of all the connections to theater. Because at the end of the day, I'm just a theater geek.
Yeah.
And I love it all.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. My wife and I will probably go next summer back to Paris. She loves shopping in Paris. And, have to stop and have a drink there. That sounds
You should,
cool.
right?
Yeah,
I'm excited to see the new Notre Dame too. I think it sounds like it's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's exciting to see that it's still there.
Yeah.
I'm glad they decided to rebuild it.
Yeah. That was a big deal when that happened. Yeah. Well, we're in a bar here now too, kind of. Right?
That's true. My favorite bar is the Coury family bar. How could I have forgotten that?
That's right. How cool. So before we, Zach, I want to do some pictures. Maybe we could do some pictures together on the main stage down there after this is over. A couple of
Great.
for the thumbnail. And my final question is, what do you love about your life?
God. You know, it's so funny. Last night, my casting director sent me a pop-up from Facebook that was from 11 years ago. And it was just a post by me, no pictures, no anything. And it just said, context, we had gotten our first artistic associate by the name of Cody Nickel. And we had expanded our season. He was going to direct some of the shows. He was also a great actor. And he was, it still is, actually very connected to the Washington, D.C. scene. Up to that point, we had only ever auditioned in New York all the time. Because all good actors, it's like all roads lead to Rome, like all good actors come out of New York mostly. Mm-hmm. But he felt like there was there is a great professional group of actors in Washington, D.C., so he felt we should go audition them. So it turned out that we did that, and I was on an Amtrak with my casting director and my artistic associate at the time. And I apparently posted and said, I'm on this Amtrak with Michael Casera, who's sending out audition appointments for tomorrow's auditions in New York, while Cody Nickel memorizes his lines from A Midsummer Night's Dream. I love my life. And I said to my casting director, if you had asked me if I had ever been on an Amtrak with you, I would have said no. I had to actually go back into the annals of my brain to remember that train ride and why we were even on the train ride. And so I think that I love my life. I love being married to Michael Wynn. I love being on the board of the chamber. I love being a member of Naples. I love the fact that this building is built. I love being a director. I love the fact that, you know, even when I was single for a decade and people were like, you got to get a life, I felt like I had a great life. You know, I was traveling all around the country, going to New York all the time for auditions or to watch Broadway shows and keep working on my craft. And I just feel like I've always been really blessed and that there's always been an angel on my shoulder. And I really feel like the angel on my shoulder is for this, because there is no way I did this alone. You know, I mean, I don't even mean the village that it took. I'm so grateful for being surrounded by great people, great board members, great staff members, and all the generous people who donated to this 72 million plus capital campaign. It's just shocking to me. But I know that the angel has been on my shoulder all the way too, because sometimes there were miracles that were just like, this, the universe wanted this, God wanted this, and I just happened to be the lucky servant who got to play the role. And so those are all the things I love about my life.
Wow. Wow. We're blessed. We're blessed. We're
blessed.
So blessed to have you in our, I'm thankful for the Comfort Inn.
Yes, thank you, Comfort Inn.
That's right. I forgot it was a Comfort Inn too, in Grand Central.
I'm grateful for Robert of Philadelphia.
Oh wow! Gee, thanks for keeping us in business. We appreciate you. God bless you. Thank you so much. Really, this has been really cool, really fun. Thanks.
Thank you.
Kristen, thank you, not just for sharing your time with us today, but for the light you shine through your work, your leadership, and your relentless belief in what's possible. It's one thing to create beautiful art, but it's another to create a space that inspires, educates, and uplifts an entire community. Your passion, your tenacity, your creativity, They've not only built a world-class theater, but they've also built belonging and beauty right here in Naples. We're lucky to have you. And I'm so grateful we got to tell some of your story today. Thank you for being one of the good people.